This boy was thrown into the river by his father as soon as he was born, and no one dared to rescue him, no matter how hard he struggled. It turns out this was the Baskerville family's trial. Whenever a newborn is born, they are thrown into the cradle of swords in the Nightmare Forest, and must walk across the path filled with swords to reach the other side, where their awakening to the Styx River's power awaits. In my past life, I was the strongest hound of the family, once single-handedly repelling an invasion by the demon race. But just as I was returning in triumph to accept my honor, my father personally sent me to the guillotine because my power threatened his position and I knew secrets I should not have. In the end, I was falsely accused of colluding with demons and died tragically at the peak of the family's prosperity. Now, reincarnated and reborn, I am always thinking of revenge. Even though I am still in my infant stage, I have a chance to gain power early. Legend has it that children who are immersed in the Styx River can gain a body as strong as iron. In my previous life, as a bastard, I was ostracized by my direct siblings and did not receive this power. This time, I will be the first to reach it, claiming all the power granted by the Styx River for myself. As the river water soaked my wounds, I felt no pain. Instead, I sensed a continuous stream of power entering my body. Just being a few minutes ahead of the others had already caused such dramatic changes. To absorb the power faster, I began to gulp down the Styx River. Even though I was in a near-drowning state, as long as my consciousness remained, I would not easily surface. 7 minutes quickly passed, and my father on the shore showed a sinister smile. He seemed to see his former self in me. However, the attendants around him grew restless, fearing that I might drown. They urged the master to pull me out immediately. Only then did my father realize he could not afford to miss such a once-in-a-century genius. So, he called for me to come up now. When I didn't respond in time, he immediately reached out and pulled me out. Seeing this, my father revealed a wicked smile. Look at this kid. Being in the Styx River wasn't enough for him. He even drank it. He already has teeth too. Next, he would witness the birth of another version of himself. But my ultimate goal is not to become a despicable person like him. What I aim to do is destroy my family with my own hands, ensuring that the Baskervilles are erased from history forever. When I woke up again, I was already back in the nursery. Unbeknownst to me, an unknown danger was slowly approaching. A maid appeared with a treasure chest behind me, but she said nothing. She simply placed the chest on the bed and left the room. Curious about what was inside, I was caught off guard when the chest opened on its own, and two venomous snakes with blood-red mouths slithered out. It seems someone was jealous of my talents and wanted to kill me before I grew up. But my life belongs to me, not fate. I won't fall so easily without completing my revenge. Facing the swift attack of the two snakes, I felt no fear. Instead, I grabbed their 7-inch spot with both hands, and using the power gained from the Styx River, tore them apart like spicy strips. Morning quickly arrived, and the attendants who came to collect my broken body were all stunned by what they saw. Not only had I not been bitten to death by the snakes, but I was perfectly fine, having spent the entire night with their remains. From that day on, all the attendants who cared for infants in the nursery were executed. As for who had ordered them to do it, that remained unknown. Only I, the hound yet to grow, saw through the truth. 8 years passed in the blink of an eye, and I began my learning phase. Although I had already experienced all of this before, when I heard that my father's swordsmanship had reached the sword master level at this point of time, I still felt a hint of pressure. It seems I must restore the power I had in my past life before the coming-of-age ceremony. After undergoing the baptism of the Styx River, not only did I gain a tough body, but my intellect also surpassed even the most prosperous period of Einstein. I was able to single-handedly defeat two venomous snakes as soon as I was born. As a result, I was regarded as a monster in the family. The three yellow-haired boys beside me were the ones who had been bullying me for a long time. Every time class ended, they would beat me up, claiming to be my older brothers. According to my memories from my past life, they grew up to be the so-called Baskerville Trident, and my death was closely related to them. They were the ones who falsely accused me of colluding with demons, giving me a crime I should never have been charged with, to ensure that they would no longer interfere with me 10 years from now. It seemed that I could not allow this to go on any longer today. At this moment, Highborough pulled out a knife and pointed it at me. He had heard that I had stayed in the Styx River for 7 minutes and wanted to personally test it. Then, he called for Lowborough, who covered my mouth and nose with his hands. They said that if I could hold on for 3 minutes, they would let me go. They say children are even more cruel, and this saying was indeed true. So, I decided to play along with them. The two in front of me were still showing off, as they didn't believe that a human could hold their breath for such a long time. After 3 minutes had passed, their faces gradually grew uncomfortable. It wasn't until 10 minutes later that they realized they had truly messed with the wrong person. But just as they decided to let me go, how could I easily let this matter die down? I then bit off Lowborough's finger, warning the other two that today, someone had to lose something from their body, or there would be no good end for them. Highborough immediately became furious, grabbing the knife and charging at me. To his surprise, I didn't even bother to dodge, letting him experience the iron body the Styx River had given me. I then grabbed his hand and glared at him fiercely, saying, "Let's see if you can handle me." I then landed a powerful punch on Highborough's face. Seeing this, Middleborough tried to retaliate for his brothers, but before he could make a move, my foot had already given him a sweep. Seeing the three of them unable to fight back, I picked up the knife and threw it in front of them, saying, "I'll be generous and let one of you leave right now. As for who will that be, you can decide for yourselves." The three of them looked at each other before starting a brutal and inhumane battle. I wasn't sure what happened during that time, but I knew that, in the days to come, the so-called Baskerville Trident would no longer exist. Soon after, the butler reported this to Hugo. Initially, he only wanted to report that I had taken first place in all the written exams, but when he mentioned the practical test happening in 5 days, he had to bring up the dispute between me and the other young masters. Although the three injured had received treatment and recovered, their spirits were severely impacted. From that moment on, they became silent when they met, and their once proud personalities turned timid. Hugo was shocked by my performance in beating the three of them without any difficulty. He immediately summoned me through the butler and asked if I had crippled the triplets. I confirmed it by saying, "If you're referring to those brothers, I believe they've received proper medical treatment since then." Originally, my father had high hopes for the three brothers because when they acted together, their physical abilities were unparalleled among their peers. But now, their relationship was completely torn apart. My father claimed I was in the wrong, and before I arrived, the three brothers had already come to him, declaring that they would graciously forgive me. Upon hearing this, my face darkened instantly. The fact that I could easily crush them with my own strength only meant that I was even stronger. After all, forgiveness is just an excuse for the weak who cannot seek revenge. My father was very pleased with my response, as strength is respected. At the same time, this was also a rule of the Baskerville family. To reward me, my father ordered the butler to take me to the snack pantry to choose the food I liked. Before I left, my father also reminded me not to lose to my direct line brothers in the practical test in 5 days. I replied, "Yes, my lord," but what I truly wanted to say was that losing was never a possibility. The scene shifted, and I arrived at the food storage warehouse. Upon hearing that I wanted chocolate, the butler immediately instructed the chef to bring the finest type. However, what I said next left everyone present completely confused. I told them that I didn't want the finished product, but rather the unprocessed cocoa beans, and it had to be the most bitter variety. They had never heard of such a way of consuming cocoa. Nevertheless, the chef followed my request and brought the most intensely flavored blood beans. One of these beans could produce 100 liters of chocolate. After tasting it, I found it unbearably bitter. This was something no human could eat. As for my reason, it wasn't for eating, but to use these blood beans to assist me in hunting monsters during the practical test 5 days later. What would happen that day would be an unprecedented major event in Baskerville history. Soon after, the day of the practical test arrived, with Paviaf Van Baskerville acting as the chief instructor. He stated that the test was simple: stay in the Red Black Mountain for a month and hunt powerful monsters. Everyone would start with 10 points for survival, while death would result in 0 points. If anyone managed to steal another student's badge, they would be awarded additional points. At this point, Paviaf mentioned the restricted area of the Red Black Mountain, advising everyone to stay within the given space where they have subjugated the monsters. Once the bell in his hand rang, the practical test officially began. Relying on my memories from my past life, I knew exactly where the most advantageous terrain was. Soon, some students began ruthlessly plotting against their own brothers, unaware that during the exam, Guardian Knights would be watching to minimize casualties as much as possible. If they indiscriminately killed innocent people, even if they obtained another's badge, they would lose points. Meanwhile, one Guardian Knight followed me to the edge of the zone, only 100 meters from the restricted area. Originally, he wanted to witness the true strength of a genius, but while others were busy hunting monsters with their swords, I was leisurely lying in the shade, acting like I was slacking off. This series of actions made the Guardian Knight question why he was even there. Little did he know, everything I did was just a facade. After observing me for a week, the Guardian Knight concluded that there was nothing interesting about me simply hiding and slacking off, so he decided to temporarily leave and report the situation. Once the troublesome person left, I immediately took out a handful of beans and tossed them into the fire. That's because, in my past life, my subordinates had told me that cocoa beans could mask the smell of meat's blood, with blood beans being the most effective. Then, after setting up several traps around me, the hunt officially began. I stepped into the restricted area of the Red Black Mountain. The smell of burning wood from the nearby branches told me that what I was looking for was right here. At this moment, my eyes suddenly lit up, and I saw a pile of self-igniting stool appear on the ground. The only monster that can produce such a thing is the Hellhound, a B+ danger level creature. Facing such a terrifying monster, I knew full well that in my past life, even at the age of 18, I couldn't defeat it alone. But now, at the age of only 8, I felt no fear whatsoever, because I knew the 3 weaknesses of the Hellhound. The first weakness: it can only charge in a straight line. As long as I use my dodging skills well, I can keep exhausting its stamina. Then, I took out a bottle and poured water onto the ground. This was the Hellhound's second weakness. Regardless of the depth of the water, they would always avoid it once they saw it. This tactic can greatly limit the Hellhound's movement. And the final, most deadly weakness: for all canines, chocolate is highly toxic. As long as I get it into the Hellhound's body, all I have to do is wait for the the poison to take effect. After all, one blood bean can produce 100 liters of chocolate. However, the hellhound has a special body structure. Its hard ribs protect its heart at all times. So, the only way to deal with it is to target its lower body and cut off its kidneys. At this moment, as I pulled my sword from the hellhound's corpse, I saw a wisp of blue energy emanate from its body. This is the energy obtained after killing a monster. This energy can make one's body even stronger. At this rate, restoring my past life's power before my coming-of-age ceremony would no longer be a wild dream. Now, at the age of 8, I have already defeated a B+ level hellhound. With this, I've basically secured the position of first place in the practical test. I have also already decided on the reward I will ask for, but just then, 4 more hellhounds appeared behind me. Seeing this, I immediately swung my sword and decapitated the previous hellhound's head, warning the others that I was not someone to be trifled with. After I made this move, the 4 hellhounds showed signs of fear, even lowering their heads. It was at this moment that I realized something was wrong. Hellhounds are proud creatures, and it was impossible for them to behave like this in front of an 8-year-old. I quickly turned around and focused my gaze, only to see a 3-headed dog exuding an aura of hellish energy appear behind me. This was a Cerberus. Seeing this, I was puzzled. Why was an A+ level Cerberus in this area when it supposedly inhabited the 7th ridge? But just then, I noticed it was bleeding. Multiple arrows were lodged in its body, and it bore several other injuries. Knowing that across the mountain is a barbarian tribe's territory, I realized that it came all the way here because it was being chased. At this moment, I kept calming myself, thinking that as long as I could hunt down this Cerberus, I would be one step closer to regaining the power of my past life. So, I gathered my courage and charged toward the Cerberus, taking the initiative to attack. Just as my strike hit one of its head, Cerberus unexpectedly counterattacked from the side with lightning speed. Luckily, my reaction time hadn't diminished from my past life, and I swung my sword, stopping its fierce attack. It seemed that even though it was injured, its combat strength hadn't dropped much. In my past life, I could easily crush a Cerberus, and in this life, I could do the same. But just as I thought that, my sword was bitten and shattered by it. In the moment of daze, my body was sent flying by its massive paw. At this moment, I truly realized the gap in strength. With my current 8-year-old body, challenging a Cerberus was still too early. Even with the iron body granted by the Styx River, after enduring its attack, my internal organs were almost shattered, causing me to lose consciousness. Soon after, I woke up and saw the Cerberus getting closer. Feeling the pain in my left arm from the previous attack, I quickly looked at it, but to my surprise, it had not been ripped off. Just as I was wondering why I only had this wound from the Cerberus's attack, it suddenly opened its mouth and charged at me. I snapped out of my thoughts and immediately dodged, or else I would have ended up like the large tree behind me, which was bitten to pieces. Then, I ran toward the iron fence ahead. If I could get past it, I would be out of the restricted area. As long as I reached the place where I had been resting, I would have a way to defeat the Cerberus. I had already set up the perfect hunting trap there. Soon, I spotted the location. I sprinted as fast as I could, with the Cerberus chasing me relentlessly. Just as I reached the first trap, I took a step and leaped over it. At that moment, its huge mouth was mere millimeters away from me. In the end, as I landed, the Cerberus stepped on the ground, triggering the trap, and countless sharp blades pierced through its body. Soon, the blood bean water I had applied began to take effect, and the 2 side heads of the Cerberus were the first to die from poisoning. It seemed that the head in the middle was the key to supporting its body. I then held a spear and concentrated my magic on it. Next, I hurled it at blazing speed. After the spear struck, the Cerberus let out an angry growl as I began counting my steps while walking toward it. It only took 7 steps before it fell to the ground, poisoned and dead. It seemed that the legend of the 7-step snake was real. Once bitten, 7 steps later, death is certain. After absorbing the energy from Cerberus, I decided to head to a certain place. Because Cerberus was the gatekeeper of the territory, there must be a dungeon that it was guarding nearby. Although there might be monsters inside that are hard to defeat, it was definitely a mysterious place filled with many rare treasures. Then, I picked up Cerberus feces and smeared it on myself, masking my scent to prevent the other monsters from ambushing me. Next, I followed Cerberus' original route and quickly found the hidden dungeon deep inside. Not only was the air thick with the scent of death, but even the ground was mixed with strange magical energy. It seemed that this dungeon hadn't been fully discovered or explored by anyone else. So, I gathered all my courage and walked into the cave, where unknown dangers would strike, or perhaps mysterious treasures awaited me. Once I entered the dark cave, I saw red minerals scattered everywhere. It seemed that this place was definitely connected to the Red All Mountain. But just then, a beam of blinding light shot at me from the depths of the cave. I deduced that the dungeon's location was there. Sure enough, as I expected, there was a glowing red gemstone emitting magical energy. At that moment, my gaze was drawn to a skeleton on the ground, and I picked up the letter that had fallen beside it. This person also belonged to the Baskerville family. The purpose of writing this letter was to warn future generations not to make the same mistake as he did. One day, he and his brother went hunting, only to accidentally stumble upon this bottomless cave. They also discovered that it was a dungeon containing treasures. So, they killed all the monsters guarding the place. But unlocking the treasure treasure's cryptic message took them a full 3 years. When entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. Thus, their conclusion was based on their being identical twins. In their mother's womb, they were considered 1. Upon entering the dungeon, they were indeed 2, but to leave as 1, they had to kill each other. Although he killed his brother in 1, the red gemstone still showed no signs of changing. In the end, unable to accept this reality, he chose to give up the treasure and live in seclusion in the mountains, because he was sure the dungeon was set up by demons to mock humans. After reading it, I was speechless. If that was true, then without any siblings, I wouldn't be able to solve the cryptic message. But that was pure nonsense, because there is no dungeon that couldn't be conquered. At that moment, the contrast between the bright light and the darkness gave me a clue. This explained why the first half of the cave was dim. So, the answer to the cryptic message was shadow. Then, I punched and shattered the red gemstone in front of me, and what emerged from it was something that only appeared in fairy tales, the Beelzebub. It is said that this is a demon sword forged from the body of a greedy magic fly, and the world originally thought it was just a legend and did not go searching for it until this sword was discovered by the demon clan. That's when the world realized that a crisis was about to come. But in this life, I was the first to find the Beelzebub, which will greatly reduce the combat power of the demon clan. Suddenly, it transformed into energy and surged into my right hand. Before long, the sword began to regenerate from within me. With this sword in my possession, I couldn't imagine how much stronger I'll be in this life. However, I didn't get to enjoy it for long, as a strong sense of hunger began to disrupt my thoughts. I guessed that it was probably the Beelzebub's doing. After all, it hadn't eaten in over 100 years here. After I walked out of the cave, the Beelzebub actually led me to rush in a specific direction. Sure enough, it had found the B+ hellhound I had hunted. I saw the sword immediately pierce into the monster's body, and during its absorption phase, the dizziness I felt was slowly fading away. After absorbing it, I actually gained the hellhound's skill, Hemorrhage. It is a skill that makes even the smallest wound continuously pump out the enemy's blood, and there are still 2 available slots remaining. It seems that this is an inherent ability of Beelzebub to absorb the opponent's skills and claim them as their own. Soon after, the greedy Beelzebub turned its attention to Cerberus. But what troubled me wasn't the fear of getting a useless skill, but rather that I wanted to use the A+ monster hunting achievement to take first place in the combat test. After the Beelzebub filled its stomach, I gained Cerberus burn injury skill, but what caught my attention was the F-level high-speed regeneration in slot 3. That's when I realized, when Cerberus fell, it crushed an F-level sewer rat. Now, with my iron body plus high-speed regeneration, it was the perfect natural combination. Soon, a month passed, and the practical test had ended. With almost no casualties, each student was able to hunt various sea-level or lower monsters. As a reward, they would all receive corresponding equipment, but the huge monster that a young hound had hunted shocked all the Baskervilles who were present. Soon, this news reached the family head. An 8-year-old child, just starting out, was able to hunt a monster that 3 adults couldn't defeat. This was an event that could overturn the history of the Baskerville family. Afterward, my father called me in again and asked how I hunted Cerberus. I confidently replied, "For canines, chocolate is the deadliest poison. The highest concentration of blood beans is enough to instantly kill Cerberus." After hearing this, my father had no doubt and even decided to fulfill one of my wishes. It seems that this time, I finally have the chance to get everything I want. I then told my father, I want to gain access to the 10,000 Ipecacle library, but I was also prepared to be rejected. After all, my status was not direct, but that of an illegitimate child. In the history of the family, such a situation was never allowed, but the result was beyond my expectation. Not only did my father not refuse me, but he even recommended books on the 6th sword technique. At that moment, I began to question whether rebirth could change a person's character. In my past life, an illegitimate child could only cultivate up to the 4th sword technique at most. However, there was no need to be too happy too soon. Currently, my father's level had reached the 7th sword technique, and even before I was executed, he had already reached the 9th sword technique. But this time, I would definitely surpass my father's highest level, because I knew of a forgotten sword technique book. As long as I comprehended all of its contents, I would directly break through to the 10th sword technique. Soon after, I arrived at the 10,000 Ipecacle library. Every book here was something I could only dream of in my past life, and right before me now was the 6th sword technique, which my father recommended I study. Well, of course my father allowed this, thinking that an 8-year-old child wouldn't be able to memorize this in a day. But I didn't care about it at all, because the purpose of my visit was different. So I flipped the pages quickly, and soon returned to the entrance of the library. Seeing how fast I was, the Guardian Knights recommended some books for me to read, but I replied, I've finished what I came here for, but before I leave, I'm thinking of reading other books, so don't worry about me and do what you need to do. After saying this, I started walking upstairs, though the guards thought it was a bad choice since that area was filled with miscellaneous books, while the ones here were much better. But I left them to their thoughts, knowing they had no idea that among the dusty miscellaneous books lay a hidden treasure. Moments later, I found what I came here for, the forgotten book called A Lurking Ambush. This book was written by the first ruler of the Baskerville family, and not only did it record the basic cultivation techniques for sword techniques 1 to 9, but it also contained the long-lost 10th sword technique. As for why no one could learn it, that was because the book had 7 missing pages. In my past life, when I found the first page's contents, my father became obsessed with the 10th sword technique. In order to find the remaining 6 pages and surpass himself, he released all the hounds and began declaring war on other families. Eventually, after sacrificing most of his forces, he gathered all 7 pages, but at that time, I had no access to the book that could match it. Now, with my rebirth, I have deeply remembered the contents of those 7 pages. I will break through the original 4th sword technique and cultivate to a level no one in the family has ever reached. Before long, I finished reading the entire book. After checking that there were no guardian knights present, I entered a meditative state. In the word of my mind, I tried to use the sword techniques against an imagined enemy. I started with the first technique. Then, I transitioned into the second and third techniques. Moving forward, I performed the 4th technique, the very limit of my past life. And lastly, I executed the 5th sword technique, surpassing what I once thought was impossible. Perhaps due to the relentless hardships I endured in my past life, I had managed to surpass my own limits in a single attempt. At this moment, I was overjoyed. I could clearly feel my magic power increasing, a level my past life took 30 years to achieve, yet in this life, I managed it at the mere age of 8. Now, I have broken through from a sword expert to the lowest level of sword graduator. I will have more freedom in controlling my magic. It seems that by the time I reach 15 and recover my previous life's power, it will be more than enough. Then, I took a magnifying glass out of my pocket, using the principle of light focus to ignite a lurking ambush. By doing this, I ensured that in this world, I would be the only one capable of breaking through to the 10th sword technique. But just then, the guards smelled something burning and immediately ran upstairs. I rubbed my head and explained that I accidentally burned a worthless book. After hearing this, both of them felt relieved. If I had burned a relatively important book, their 3 generations of lives wouldn't be enough to compensate. The scene shifted, and I arrived at my father's room, where I told him that after studying, I could now feel a burning sensation inside my body. My father and the butler froze on the spot when they heard this, because it meant I had entered the realm of the sword. Of course, this wasn't my real strength, and to test my current level, my father arranged a duel for me, a sea-level orc that had been starving for 2.5 months. At this moment, the audience held their breath. For an 8-year-old child, this was something he couldn't handle. Soon after, the orc's chain was unlocked, and the next second, it roared wildly. Then, it charged toward me. Seeing this, I swung my sword swiftly, severing one of its arms. This scene left the audience in shock. Due to the influence of the B-level Hellhound's hemorrhage skill, the orc, even with high-speed regeneration, was powerless. At that moment, I took the opportunity to attack its foot, causing the orc to fall to the ground. Looking into its eyes filled with fear, it probably could never have imagined why it couldn't regenerate. With a grand gesture from me, a blood-red magical power clung to the blade of the sword. The next second, with a single thrust, I instantly ended the orc's life. This time, the audience was completely unable to sit still. From my initial performance to now instantly killing a C-class monster, I was undoubtedly a once-in-a-generation genius. At just 8 years old, I had already mastered the first sword technique. However, in my father's eyes, I had only won because the orc was much weaker. Seeing this, I smiled at my father and said, "Is there anything stronger than this orc?" Hearing this, the audience could hardly believe their ears, glancing at each other in shock. Originally, I wanted to use this to show off and have my father send me to a specialized academy, but he went straight for the real deal, a B-class troll that had been starved for 2.5 years. As the chains restraining the monster were released, the battle was imminent. When the troll threw a punch at me, I used my agile movement to dodge its attack, appearing behind it. However, I passed up the opportunity to counterattack because I knew the B-class troll have excellent regenerative power. If I couldn't inflict a fatal injury, then any attack would become worthless. That's why capturing a troll must involve a meticulous plan. Seeing the troll charge at me again, this time I chose not to dodge, but instead executed the Baskerville first sword technique, harshly slashing a huge gash across its shoulder. At this moment, although I had found its fatal weakness, I faced another dilemma. How many successful moves should I make to ensure I could kill the troll instantly without making my father suspicious? Then, an idea came to me. If I pretended to realize something during the duel instead of taking down the monster right away, I could not only ease my father's doubts, but also have a good reason to reveal more of my strength. So, just as the troll's wound was about to fully heal, I immediately shouted, attracting the attention of everyone present, including my father. I have finally had a breakthrough. Next, I was going to attempt to instantly kill the troll. If I failed, I would choose to give up. Just then, my eyes were filled with killing intent, and at the same time, I transferred my magical power to the blade of my sword, pretending to have mastered the second sword technique at this moment. Sure enough, as I expected, the controlled force perfectly cut through the troll's thick skin, splitting its head and body in two. Under the incredulous gazes of the crowd, I made a stunning display, giving them a new understanding of my abilities. In the following days, due to my overwhelming strength, neither my peers nor the older students dared to get get too close to me. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that my father was greatly shocked after witnessing my performance. Up until now, the strength I had demonstrated was only at the mid-rank sword expert, but in reality, with my current strength, I had already mastered the 5th sword technique of Baskerville, and with the super speed regeneration I had just acquired, it was no less impressive than the lower-level graduator. At that moment, the triplets I had previously bullied found me. I initially thought they had come to seek revenge, but unexpectedly, it was because they thought my monster-slaying skills were impressive. The 3 of them had already become my loyal fans. Instantly, goosebumps spread across my body, reflecting on my past life. I had been killed because of them, and I couldn't wait to make them disappear. However, just as I was preparing to beat them again, the butler found me and informed me of something my father had instructed me to do. Meanwhile, the head of the Baskerville family and the vice head of the Morgue family, Adolf, were discussing how to organize this year's joint training. Although the 2 families didn't have the best relationship, there was once an emperor who said, Baskerville is a family of swords, Morgue is a family of magic. Swordsmanship and magic should complement each other. Only then can the country break through the peak stage. Since then, every year, children between the ages of 8 and 15 have to participate in the joint training of the 2 families. At this moment, Adolf asked, I heard Baskerville has given birth to a peerless genius, and we Morgue have one too. He then called for their family's genius girl, Camus, who was also his most beloved niece. But he had already plotted his strategy, knowing his niece's short temper, and wanted to use this opportunity to suppress the head of the Baskerville family, Hugo. Camus immediately disregarded any sense of hierarchy and started blasting Hugo. You shameless mine thief, quickly return our ruby mine. It turned out that the conflict between the 2 families all started over the mining rights of the ruby mine. Seeing this, Adolf pretended to advise his niece not to speak like that. Fortunately, Hugo wasn't angry, just thinking it was a matter of poor child discipline. Camus, however, was unyielding. As a magic genius, she needed enough ruby mines for her magical experiments. Adolf hurriedly stopped her from continuing because a wild beast was desperately trying to suppress its inner rage. At that moment, a single sentence broke the stalemate. I guess the Morgues don't teach their children to not envy what is others. I then entered the room with the butler, pushing the door open. Upon seeing me, Adolf began assessing my strength, but to his surprise, his niece had already left her seat. Camus questioned me. How dare you say that? The ruby mine is bound to the magical families. At this moment, I was stunned because the girl in front of me was actually the most powerful mage 20 years in the future, capable of even controlling the royal family, and was revered by the world as the authoritative fire goddess of authority. But instead of showing that grandeur now, she had come all the way to our territory just to throw a tantrum. I couldn't help but mock her for it. Camus was immediately enraged, and then she gathered ice magic in her hands. Originally, I thought she wanted to spar with me, but unexpectedly, she was just recreating the terrain map of the 2 families. At this point, Camus pointed to a location. It was precisely at the Morgue's territory, where the ruby mine was located. She explained that part of the mine should belong to the Morgue family, and Baskerville had no right to claim it all for themselves. I told her that rubies were worth less than scrap iron to us, and were only interested in our land. Camus decided to more directly show who had the right to mine and obtain the ruby mine, extending her hand from her family's territory into Baskerville's land. The implication was clear. The arm was still hers even if it passed through the boundaries, and the same applied to the mines. I immediately grabbed Camus' hand, then pulled out a small knife from my belt. Anyone who dares to invade our territory will be killed without mercy. However, just as the blade was about to touch, I had already anticipated that Adolf would intervene, so I released her hand and explained, the blade is just a toy in the Baskerville family. It can't cause any harm. Afterward, I apologized to Adolf and Camus, and my father suggested we bring the topic back to the point, which was this year's joint training between the 2 families. The scene shifted, and Camus and I found ourselves standing in the arena. As the bell for the match rang, Camus immediately raised her hand, reciting fire, thunder, ice, and earth magic incantations. Seeing the 3 types of magic coming toward me, I then used my agile positioning to dodge them all, and sneered at her for believing that knowing multiple types of magic made her a genius. Suddenly, a wall of earth shot up from the arena floor, but I shattered it with a single kick. It couldn't block my attack at all. However, not wanting to hurt the future most powerful mage, I merely flicked her on the head when counterattacking. At this moment, the gap in strength was already glaringly obvious, but Camus still refused to admit defeat, summoning 2 more walls of earth. In fact, this level of magic was simply insulting to human intelligence. What's the point if I can just go around it? Not wanting to damage her pride too much, I decided to be the best actor and control my strength. After taking my punch, the 2 walls of earth also suffered a small hole. Then, I flicked her forehead with another flick of my finger. But even in this clearly decided situation, Camus still used fire magic against me. I thought to myself, this is probably why she became the fire goddess of authority. She never gives up easily. At that moment, I heard a conversation from behind me on the arena. So, I stopped my attack and retreated. The next second, a massive fireball magic appeared behind me. This was my strategy to make the match a draw, without any overwhelming show of strength. When the fireball hit both of us. Camus' clothes were burned, leaving only the most important parts. I then took off my shirt and gave it to her. The result of the match was as I expected. Due to unavoidable circumstances, our duel was declared a draw, but I believe, at this moment, everyone would consider Baskerville the winner. However, on the way back, my father still criticized me because I hadn't gone all out. Being soft-hearted on the battlefield was a grave mistake. He warned me that no matter if it's a woman or a family member, if they pose a threat, I must strike back. At that moment, I was startled, unsure if Hugo was genuinely worried about me. I could barely remember what he was like during my childhood, but after my mother's death, he had completely ignored me, his illegitimate son, and treated me like discarded trash. I then told him that I was planning another scheme. After all, Baskerville's focus was on expanding land, while the Red Black Mountain and the ruby mines were constantly threatened by barbarians and demonic creatures. If we could use the Morg family's power, we could minimize the losses when expanding our territory. Father was very pleased with my plan, but little did he know, he had come up with it first based on memories from my past life. When we reached the corner, Adolf found us again and requested a conversation. Soon after, we were in my father's room, where the two of them began their discussion. Adolf knew that Baskerville's strength far surpassed the Morg family's, so he decided to handle the issues with the land and ruby mine peacefully. He proposed a cross-family marriage, betrothing Baskerville's eldest son to their genius, Camus. As soon as he finished speaking, Camus rejected Adolf. She refused to marry someone 17 years older than her, and if they were to get engaged, it had to be with someone closer to her age, whose strength she recognized. I guessed that the person he meant was probably me, because since we entered the room, her gaze hadn't left me for a second. At the same time, Adolf also guessed his niece's intentions. He then whispered to Camus that she could not marry me, an illegitimate son with impure blood. Hugo didn't want to get involved, so he handed the decision to me, and I agreed to the proposal. But Adolf was the first to disagree. To test me, he decided to personally check if I was qualified to be his family's son-in-law. After all, Camus, whether in appearance or strength, was one of the top figures in the empire. The scene shifted, and we both arrived at the arena for the duel. I saw Adolf chanting 3 types of magic incantations, and he conjured up a pot out of thin air. He then declared that he would duel with me using the pot, and as long as even a single drop of water came out of it, I would win. I was well aware of Adolf's strength, and the probability of defeating him head-on was only 10%, while a sneak attack would have a 50% chance. But I guessed that father had agreed to this uneven duel in order to see my current strength. That made things simpler. As long as I met father's expectations, it would be fine. I immediately drew my sword and rushed forward, but suddenly, Camus reminded me not to face his uncle head-on. It turned out that Adolf had already thought of a way to deal with swordsmen, using a defense shield magic with incredible defensive power. For an ordinary sword, it was impossible to break through it. Then he began chanting fire magic incantations, and huge fireballs started gathering above his head. But as he threw them at me, Camus scolded him for using extra magic. This made Adolf unsure of which side she was on. Nevertheless, memories from my past life told me that Adolf was not unbeatable. If I could seize his 2 weaknesses, I could easily make him lower his guard, or even kill him. With that, I swung my sword and relentlessly attacked the magical shield. Seeing this, Adolf said he didn't want to waste his effort, thinking that this level of magic, even if it was genius level, was still unable to be cracked. Just as he finished speaking, the next second, a crack appeared in the magic shield. For this, Adolf greatly admired my focus, as I managed to hit the same spot accurately 23 times. After I delivered the final blow, my sword shattered from the pressure. Little did he know, this was the final step of my plan. Father and Camus, standing nearby, were both astonished. At this moment, Adolf, who was still doubting my strength to marry his niece, had the pot above his head actually start leaking water. This meant that I had passed his strength test. I gave him a contemptuous look. After all, he would never have guessed that the biggest mistake he made was lowering his guard when he saw my broken sword, which led to his loss. At this moment, Camus' face turned crimson, and unknowingly, the two of us, who had only known each other for a short time, had already arranged a marriage for our families to live in peace. Time quickly passed, and 7 years later, in Baskerville's training ground, the once immature children had now grown into a spirited young men. Looking into their sharp eyes, it was clear they had become a qualified pack of hounds. They were now cooperating to hunt an A-rank ox bear, which was their final exam to determine whether they could graduate. At the same time, the trident that I had shattered, which should have lost itself and wasted the rest of its years, had unknowingly become my little fanboys. Now, they played a significant role in team operations. Originally, their strength wasn't bad. It was just that I had forced them to change the direction of their evolution. After 70 minutes of encirclement, the ox bear finally exhausted all its energy, and what remained was the slaughter from the many hounds. With this hunting experience, each of them had reached the lowest level of sword expert. As of now, the 7 years of training had come to an end. However, the instructor still reminded them the difference between wild ox bears and those kept in cages was enormous, so when facing any magical beasts they had previously defeated, they must remain on high alert at all times, because death happens far more easily smoothly than imagined. Before long, after completing their final salute, they began choosing their future paths. In the Baskerville family, there were 7 Night Orders, each with its specific duties, such as reconnaissance, defense, assassination, etc. As for me, after much contemplation, I chose the Hound Night Order from my past life. Now, I had reached the intermediate rank at the 5th Baskerville technique, though in these 7 years, I had only advanced from low to intermediate. Compared to my past life, this was already beyond the strength I had at 40 years old. At that moment, the butler suddenly appeared, happily telling me that my father needed to see me, as my first task at 15 had probably already been decided. The scene shifted, and 7 years later, I finally saw my father sitting in front of me. I quickly noticed something unusual and asked him about the scar on his face. He touched his face and said meaningfully, "It was left by a female archer from the wildlands of the Red Black Mountain, but I managed to give her the same scar on her face. But no matter what, I still have to congratulate you on your successful graduation, becoming a qualified hound." However, the next sentence from my father left me unable to calm my emotions for a long time. In my past life, for 40 years, I was either on the battlefield or engaged in assassination. As an illegitimate child, I only had this kind of treatment. It was impossible for me to enjoy the elite management and training like pure-blood children. I never expected that the lower house my father mentioned this time was actually part of the elite class, and he had even decided to let me try the position of deputy consul of the underdog city. It seems that my father's personality in this life has really changed. He no longer looks at bloodlines. Instead, he looks at achievements. At this point, my achievements had already surpassed those of the 18-year-old hounds, which is why my father gave me such special treatment. But before I could take on this role as deputy consul, I still had to borrow something from my father. I originally thought he would take some time to consider before making a decision, but to my surprise, he stamped the document without any hesitation and even said that he trusted that I wouldn't do anything foolish. When I was about to leave, the butler decided to tell me some heartfelt words. Because of my extraordinary talent, the head of the family held me in high regard and was optimistic about my potential, hoping that this time I would do my best to complete the task. After all, before going to the battlefield, my skills would greatly improve in my role as a deputy consul, even surpassing those of some pure-blood children. After hearing this, my face immediately darkened. This was something I'd rather talk about later. At this point, I wasn't even sure if I could handle the role of deputy consul, though this was definitely a good opportunity for me to hone my skills. But I had no interest in current affairs at all. No matter what, I couldn't forget the feeling of losing my head in my past life. Despicable Hugo, just you wait. I'll make sure you experience that same feeling yourself. Soon after, I arrived in Underdog City. At that moment, someone stopped me, as this was not a place where just anyone could enter freely. I turned around and said coldly, "Remove your hand this instant." Then, I revealed an official document proving that I was the new deputy consul. Seeing this, they quickly apologized. Without wasting time, I ordered them to prepare women and drinks immediately, as I was going to hold a party. The 2 men were visibly confused. Before long, the party began. At this moment, standing by the window was the general secretary of the city of Underdog, Chihuahua Baskerville. Though he desperately wanted to change the city's current state, he was constantly suppressed by the wealthy, who secretly colluded behind the scenes. The mere thought of it made him furious, and he was about to reprimand the new deputy consul for drinking on his first day. But just then, I appeared behind him, making him freeze in shock. Then, I looked at the various articles on the law, and almost every single one had small loopholes, which had led to the rise of many illicit businesses, and even underground black power organizations were above the law. I told Chihuahua that I wouldn't change the already effective laws, but would instead establish a new one under their premise, and I promised to eliminate all illicit businesses within a week. But since I was quite young, the words I blurted out probably wouldn't convince many of the bosses, so I had to put on a performance to make the people here follow me. The next day, I instructed Chihuahua to issue a notice of a new law, gathering everyone in the center of the city. Looking at the new deputy consul, who still hadn't grown a full beard, the crowd below started to scoff, but I couldn't care less. This emergency meeting was held to persuade them. At this moment, I explained the Baskerville law, stating that it would continue to be enforced in the future and would be stricter than before. Anyone who violated it would be held accountable. At this point, the crowd still didn't believe it, because past experience told them that new officials usually only put on a show, and in the end, they would simply slack off. Chihuahua immediately scolded those who were making random comments, and a few people quickly shut their mouths after hearing this. Seeing this, I actually wanted to give this position to Chihuahua. It would be much more convenient than me speaking under the scorching sun. Then, I pulled out a wooden stick. Under the surprised gazes of everyone, I suddenly exerted force and drove the stick into the ground. This was the prelude to the new law I was about to establish. Vakir Special Law, Paragraph 1, Article 2. Whoever can pull this stick out will receive a 10 billion gold coin reward. Immediately, everyone in the square gasped in astonishment. After all, 10 billion was 400 times the average monthly salary. They began to suspect that I was just trying to catch greedy people, and it was impossible to actually give that much money. At this moment, a little girl raised her hand. She she told me that she wanted to try. An elderly person nearby saw this and advised her not to do something foolish. As the saying goes, foolish people have foolish luck. But her mother was seriously ill and urgently needed money, so she had to seize this opportunity. Looking at the sword hanging from my waist, the girl fell into deep thought. If, as others said, the reward money was fake and she would be executed, then who would take care of her mother? At this point, I sternly told the little girl not to hesitate. Once you step onto the stage, you must follow the law, or you will face severe punishment. She didn't hesitate any longer, squatted down, and tightly gripped the wooden stick. To everyone's surprise, with just a slight effort, she pulled it out. At this moment, not only was the little girl stunned, but the people below were also frozen in place. I exuded a murderous aura, because I knew that when people's expectations are at their highest and then suddenly drop to the lowest, it's incredibly uncomfortable. So, I pretended to draw the sword from my waist. When the girl saw this, she was terrified and shut her eyes tightly, quietly awaiting her execution. The next second, to their surprise, I indeed took out a bag of gold coins, but this wasn't all the money. Since the rest would be too heavy for her to carry alone, I would have it delivered to her within the day, along with a guard to ensure her safety. Then, I patted the little girl's head and told everyone that this was the benefit of following the special law. In the days that followed, the number of people in the city violating the law noticeably decreased and crime rates were halved. This method was actually something Camus had implemented in my past life. However, due to her impulsive nature after taking power, she was never truly loved by the people. Suddenly, Chihuahua burst into tears. In fact, from the moment he saw me, he had looked down on me. But now, on just my few days as deputy consul, I had achieved such good results. He was truly impressed and swore to always follow me from now on. However, I told Chihuahua not to rejoice too soon, because the real battle had just begun. Then, I drew dozens of crosses on the map. These places were where the potential illegal groups were located. Looking at the map, Chihuahua was astonished. Although he was aware of some of the illegal businesses, there were still many more that he had no idea about. So, he asked me how I managed to investigate so thoroughly. I pointed to my nose and said, I didn't investigate at all. I just relied on my nose. Just then, a servant rushed in with a report. He said that the Youth Autonomy Association had invited me to attend an important meeting. I didn't know at the time, but the Youth Autonomy Association was an organization formed by 7 local native families. Although it's called the Youth Autonomy Association, it's just a promiscuous social club. Hearing this, I couldn't help but smile. It seemed that these insects had already started to stir. Meanwhile, the association's members were leisurely holding a party in a club within a high-end hotel to celebrate the appointment of the new deputy consul. Whether they were drinking or carelessly spilling their wine, they were fully indulging themselves. As rich heirs, they certainly had money, but all of this was prepared for me. As soon as I showed up, they would threaten me with the lives of hundreds of commoners, forcing me to pay for the expenses myself. At this point, the leader, with yellow hair, mocked the Baskerville family, saying they were just a group of dogs who only knew how to dance with swords. Years ago, he had a conflict with a family, and the Baskerville family had supported him, even fighting back and personally destroying the entire family. But just as they were discussing the background of the new deputy consul, the red-haired man noticed something strange. A stranger had entered the room. When the waiter realized they didn't know me, he grabbed my hair and tried to force me out. However, in the blink of an eye, his arm was bent 90 degrees by me. I then walked forward and told everyone that I was the new deputy consul. Then, I immediately asked them what they had called me here for. Hearing this, not only did they ignore me, but they also continued to chat among themselves. I slammed my hand on the table and then released 40% of my magic. Instantly, hundreds of glasses of wine, after being infused with magic, couldn't bear the pressure and exploded. After the commotion, they finally realized the severity of the situation, and now they knew they had really messed with the wrong person. Although the new deputy consul is indeed 15 years old, with his current strength, even if all of them, with their intermediate expert level skills, teamed up, they might not be able to defeat me. Afterwards, I approached the red-haired man and questioned him, asking if he intended to trick me into paying for the expenses of the club. According to my memories from my past life, people like him enjoy bullying new deputy consuls in this way. The red-haired man stammered, not knowing what to say. Seeing this, the yellow-haired man immediately answered my question, saying that they didn't dare to do such a thing. The purpose of inviting me was actually to test my integrity. After all, this city was quite corrupt, and if the new deputy consul could be easily bribed, they would report to the higher-ups and request a replacement. Clearly, I knew he was making up excuses. So, since that was the case, I had no choice but to take action. I then threw my fingers directly into the red-haired man's abdomen, kindly reminding him that even the most loyal dog can't fully obey its master. After stepping on the red-haired man, I asked the others why I had suddenly taken action. If they didn't know, they could expect the same fate as him. To avoid being beaten, the others quickly explained the situation clearly, but little did they know, whether they answered or not, I would still give them a good beating, because the purpose of my visit today was to eradicate this regional autonomy association. After hearing this, they no longer held back and believed that their combined numbers were enough to crush me, but they still underestimated my strength. Today, I was going to teach these disobedient fools a lesson. After giving them a beating, I locked them all in a cage. At that moment, I noticed the yellow-haired man still had some arrogance left, shouting that as soon as he got out, he would take my head. Hearing this, I casually said, "Once the sun sets, I will execute them all. While I'm at it, I will bury all those who are associated with them." Immediately, voices begging for mercy filled the cage. Chihuahua, seeing this, also tried to persuade me not to go too far, but if he had been through what I went through, he wouldn't be saying such nonsense. However, the punishment didn't end here, because there were even more cruel things waiting for these guys. At that moment, a bald man suddenly walked in. He was the prison's judge, and the various torture tools he brought were ones I had commissioned. He also said that after 30 years of torturing people, he had never seen such cruel tools, and upon seeing them for the first time, he could only feel disgust. Now, what I was about to do was use these tools to make those nobles who refused to admit their crimes experience the agony of torture, a pain like hell on earth. Soon after, this incident spread as a rumor. Some people believed in my governance. After all, I had no hesitation in spending 10 billion gold coins. Punishing a few lawbreakers was nothing. Others thought that they just hadn't figured out the script, and that once the higher-ranked native families stepped in, the deputy consul would have to release them. This part of the guess was actually right, but only half right. Not only did the native families personally come to apologize, but they also sent a large amount of gold as hush money. With this, the people I had imprisoned would certainly be released, but I made no promises about whether they would truly be released unharmed. Since this incident, the number of poor people violating the law had almost reached zero. Now, the remaining violators were all nobles. So, I reminded Chihuahua that in the next strategy, he would be directly involved, and he had to be fully alert. The scene shifted, and we arrived at the place for monster trading. Although it was clearly stated that it was for monsters only, there were some slaves and poor people mixed in. In order to manipulate the illegal groups behind the scenes, my plan was for Chihuahua to act as the seller, while I would disguise myself as a slave for sale. Soon after, Chihuahua handed a certificate to the auctioneer, confirming that he was there to sell. Because of my unusual hair and eye color, I was quickly noticed by the auctioneer, who immediately told Chihuahua that I would fetch a good price. Soon, the slave auction officially began. The first item on the stage was a hell rhino, a A-class monster with 19 hearts. Its skin, bones, and bull horns were all top-quality materials. Therefore, the auctioneer set its starting price at 100 million. The nobles, seeing such a rare item, raised their paddles and bid higher. Eventually, the hell rhino was sold for 250 million. After several successful transactions, the auctioneer decided to bring out an old stock, a battle-type barbarian girl from the Red Black Mountain. As long as she could be fully tamed, she would make an extremely reliable bodyguard. The starting price was set at 5 million. Even though this was dozens of times cheaper than the hell rhino, the nobles in attendance were not interested in bidding for the barbarian girl. After all, her wild nature would be hard to tame, and if things went wrong, she could endanger the lives of the entire family. Seeing this, the auctioneer had no choice but to give another motivational speech, lowering the starting price to 1 million. Seeing that the nobles showed no interest in her, he reluctantly signaled for the barbarian girl to be taken down. Suddenly, feeling that the chance to escape was slipping away, the barbarian girl became agitated, letting out an eerie growl at the nobles on stage. Seeing this, a muscular man threw a swift punch to her abdomen, knocking the barbarian girl unconscious. After dealing with this unwanted item, in order to stabilize the nobles' mood and encourage them to continue bidding, the auctioneer promised that the next items would be rare goods unlike anything seen this year. He then decisively called me to the stage. With my stunning appearance and rare eye and hair color, the nobles on stage began to stir. Before the auctioneer could finish introducing me, the bid had already risen to 600 million by a noblewoman, but bidder number 99 raised it to 6 billion. Hearing this, the auctioneer froze. At this point, the final sale price was basically determined. No one dared to bid any further, fearing that bidder number 99 was a plant hired by the organizers to drive up the price. They worried that if they continued bidding, the organizers would step in to halt the auction, forcing them to pay an even higher final price. However, when they saw the true identity of the bidder from number 99, they discovered it was Baron Gambino, the head of the grain storage district. It was rumored that he had recently acquired multiple land projects, absorbing a large amount of capital, and now his net worth had made him one of the top 10 richest people. For him, 6 billion was no big deal, considering the rare value of this item. If it were resold, it could easily double its value. At this point, an assistant beside him advised caution, warning that a misstep could result in huge losses. After all, the auctioneer would never make a loss on a deal. Hearing this, Baron Gambino immediately scolded her, but not listening to his assistant's advice would be his lifelong mistake. Since there was no counteroffer, I was finally sold to Baron Gambino for the exorbitant price of 6 billion. I didn't know whether he was bent or not, but just by looking at me, he was already breathing heavily and drooling, saying that he had already come up with many ways to play with me. But I didn't pay any attention and instead raised my hands. Baron Gambino thought I was asking him to unlock my chains, but in the next second, with a sudden burst of strength, the chains instantly broke with a loud snap. Immediately after, Afterward, I stomped my foot on the floor and magic poured out, causing the seat to explode, blasting Baron Gambino away with the impact. Seeing the blood-sucking fat man struggling on the ground, I struck his back with a palm to prevent him from continuing to harm the poor. With the infusion of magic, his blood vessels couldn't withstand the pressure and exploded. After dealing with Baron Gambino, I took off my wig and said to the people below, "The circus really suits the occasion today. Every single one of you here. Don't expect to get out unscathed." The auctioneer, seeing the new deputy consul, was initially flustered, but after disrupting his business, he knew that even if he risked his life, he had to go down with me. But they all had underestimated my power. This time, I could finally enjoy the thrill of slaughter. At this moment, no one could stop me, not even the strongest muscular man here, who was instantly killed by me. Realizing that continuing like this was futile, the auctioneer recalled that I had been brought in by Chihuahua and immediately threatened him to tell me to stop, or else he would have to take action. Seeing this, I remained indifferent, since emotional threats couldn't touch me. However, when Chihuahua actually wanted to risk his life to ensure my escape from here, it made me burst into laughter. It seemed his loyalty was 100%. Then, I told him there was no need for extreme actions. Before coming here, I received a whistle from my father, and the deafening sound almost echoed across the entire earth. But 1 minute after the sound ended, nothing happened except for some quietness. However, just as the auctioneer thought I was bluffing, the next second, his neck sprayed blood. Then a mysterious figure with a hood appeared here, but he wasn't alone. Dozens of them emerged from the shadows, waiting for my command. The newcomers were none other than the Baskerville family's Pitbull Knights. With a single command from me, the Pitbull Knights began dealing with the trash in the area. At this moment, one of them arrived behind Baron Gambino's assistant, but just as he was about to strike, I rushed over and stopped him, saying that this person didn't need to be killed and could be spared. There would be many things I'd need her help with in the future. Before long, my uncle, the leader of the Pitbull Knights, greeted me. The reason he arrived so promptly to assist me was actually for another purpose. He wanted me to join the Pitbull Knights after I was sent to the battlefield, but I wasn't interested in that. So, I casually made up an excuse and left. Then, I went to the circus's underground warehouse, intending to raid the vault here. But just then, I noticed a breathing sound beside me. When I lifted the green cloth covering the cage, I found that inside was the barbarian girl who had been called up for auction earlier. At this moment, her body was extremely weak, and if not treated in time, she would soon lose consciousness. I can only say that she is lucky that I had a method to save her. Then, I took a bottle of red potion from my waist. This was the advanced healing potion that the instructor rewarded me with for my excellent performance in the graduation exam. So, I immediately poured it into the barbarian girl's mouth. As the potion took effect, her previously battered body healed instantly. At the same time, the barbarian girl, feeling her strength return, woke up at that moment. But when she saw me, a human, she was still frightened and curled up in the corner. It seemed that this barbarian girl had really suffered here. But when she learned that I was the one who saved her, her originally fearful expression turned to confusion. After all, humans and barbarians are enemies, but I, a human, had actually saved her. I then used the few phrases I had learned from fighting against the barbarians in my past life to explain to her everything that had happened here. I also hoped that after she returned, she wouldn't hold a grudge, and that I could let her leave here now. Upon hearing this, the barbarian girl was extremely moved, speaking a few sentences in her dialect with excitement. Although I could understand some of it, it was still difficult for me because I am not that fluent. As the girl was about to leave, she glanced back at me, seeming a bit reluctant. But even though she accepted me, her family might regard her as a traitor. In the end, she thanked me in barbarian language before leaving. Now, I would begin the real reason I came here. I lifted a piece of cloth, and what appeared before me was the hunted magic beast from the auction, the Hell Rhino. Next, it was time to let the Beelzebub have a good meal. I had to complete the devouring and leave this place of chaos before the Pitbull Knights arrived. Soon, the events of that night spread to the common people. Anyone who had participated in the slave trade had their limbs and 3 fingers chopped off, and several businesses were burned to the ground overnight. However, the heads of the 7 major indigenous families were dissatisfied with the sentence, and each wrote a protests to the administrative office. But I clearly warned the 7 major indigenous families. The Baskerville family hated slave trading the most, and their sons were the ones who started it. Anyone who violated this law must accept the punishment without objection. As for the letters, I tore them up and threw them in the trash and told them I would report everything to the Baskerville family and have them intervene in the investigation. In the days that followed, the 7 major indigenous families no longer sent letters. Instead, they knelt at my door, begging for mercy, hoping I would give them 5 years to have another son and continue their family line. But the law was a sacred pact, and I decisively rejected them. As for all the laws they had broken, they were all investigated and confirmed within these few days. After hearing this, the faces of the 7 men turned pale with fear. After all, they never imagined they would fall to such a state. In the end, I confiscated all their current assets, and for the crime of treason, punished their families for 3 generations. From then on, a saying spread among the people: the new deputy consul was both a devil and an angel. The devil refers to the extreme cruelty with which I punish those who violate the law, while the angel is because of my presence. The nobles no longer dared to openly exploit the common people, and with the suppression of noble exploitation, the living quality of the common people greatly improved, and even the employment rate matched that of the top cities. Although this barely met my expected results, the city's prosperity was, in appearance, just an illusion. If there were no new laws in place, those nobles I had crushed underfoot would surely do everything in their power to rise again. So, in the following days, I immersed myself in studying the laws every day. When Chihuahua saw the new laws I had written, he was greatly shocked. He never expected that a mere 15-year-old child could come up with dozens of rigorous laws. At that moment, he realized that as long as I, the deputy consul, remained in office, the probability of law violations could indeed drop to 99%, and this city would become one of the most prosperous cities. The scene shifted, and I arrived at the underground prison where criminals were held. Before me stood Cindy Wendy, Baron Gambino's assistant. She was confused, wondering why everyone except for her had been executed that night. I immediately explained. The reason was simple. I have some questions to ask you. But Cindy Wendy, having undergone strict training, refused to yield, as they were used to such situations. So, I made a proposition. If she could answer my questions, all her crimes would be absolved, and she could leave. But if she failed to answer, she would regret this day for the rest of her life. Before capturing Cindy Wendy, I had already investigated her background. She had a business acumen that ordinary people lacked, and if applied to lawful and legitimate trade, she would undoubtedly become an unparalleled financial expert in the future. She might even influence the global economic direction. Cindy Wendy bit her lip, lost in thought. In this dilemma, whichever choice she made would lead to death. However, since both paths led to the same end, she chose to believe in the deputy consul's justice rather than continuing to engage in actions that violated the law. And my first question was my mandatory governance correct? Cindy Wendy affirmed my answer. At that moment, I smiled wickedly and then lifted her chin, saying, "Then please tell me the reason you think it's correct." Seeing the murderous intent in my eyes, Cindy Wendy felt a chill run down her spine. I then removed my hand on her chin and walked back to the chair. Shortly after, Cindy Wendy pointed out its shortcomings. She felt that while I used the most ruthless methods to catch the most powerful criminals to set an example, in the long run, it would bring about the hatred and anger of the common people. Once I gained power stronger than Baskervilles in this city, the common people would no longer welcome me as they do now. The inevitable consequence would be their loathing, and even Baskerville would see me as a target of betrayal. I knew this scenario better than anyone, so I asked her what course of action she suggested and how I should proceed from here. Cindy Wendy replied, "Give all your current power and the honor you've created here to the leader of the Baskerville family selflessly. To avoid drawing attention, you must hide your identity and strength and go to the academy in the center of the empire, because the people there are about the same age as you, and your identity will be easily forgotten. Then, once the time is right, the leader of the Baskerville family will become your scapegoat." Upon hearing this, my expression instantly darkened. I then coldly said, "So what you're saying is, you want the hunting dog to bite off its own owner's neck?" Yet, it wasn't that I disliked her idea. On the contrary, I completely agreed with it. It was almost exactly the same as my plan. As a hunting dog that would inevitably take revenge on the family, this would also be the only way to eliminate hatred. I told Cindy Wendy that I would remember this. Then I took a key from my pocket, and I would keep my promise to ensure her release without guilt. At this moment, Cindy Wendy looked very confused. She truly didn't expect that I wasn't interrogating a criminal, but seeking help. But just as Cindy Wendy was about to leave, she kindly reminded me not to regret letting her go today. As soon as she finished speaking, I told her the story of the indigenous families, revealing that there should have been 8 of them, with the 8th being the Mesomadinaro family, the wealthiest merchant family. Hearing this, her eyes showed emptiness, and she tightly clenched her fists. Before they were wiped out, the youngest son of the Mesomadinaro family boasted about his newly learned swordsmanship at his birthday party. But when the elders saw it, they all fell into panic, because this swordsmanship was actually from Baskerville. Soon, this matter was leaked and spread to Hugo's ears. When their family secret was exposed, he immediately released the hounds to clean up the gate. But no one knew that the one who framed the Mesomadinaro family was actually related to the offspring of the other 7 families. They had stolen Baskerville's swordsmanship secrets and deliberately taught it to the young child of the Mesomadinaro family. At this point, Cindy Wendy suppressed her sorrow and said that this matter had nothing to do with her. Then I could only uncover her veil, revealing that she was the only Mesomadinaro family member secretly taken by the 7 families' offspring, and had even endured humiliation for a full 2.5 years. Cindy Wendy immediately became furious. She didn't want to recall that tragic memory from her childhood, and insisted on leaving this place of turmoil right away. Seeing this, I asked her if she knew the rest of the story. It wasn't that I was deliberately accusing the 7 families' offspring, but the destruction of the Mesomadinaro family was indeed related to them, and it was a crime they had confessed to. Before they died, those who sought to save their lives naturally revealed all their secrets, including the crime of framing the Mesomadinaro family. After hearing this, Cindy Wendy suddenly turned around and scolded me, saying that such a thing was impossible. Although her family was indeed ranked at the bottom. They had always been adored by the other families. "If you dare lie to me, I'll make sure to tear you to pieces even if I die." So, I lit a flare and had her confirm everything with her own eyes. In the next moment, Cindy Wendy covered her mouth and began to cry out in agony. She had endured 10 years of hatred, only to discover that the true mastermind behind the destruction of the Mesamedinaro family was actually the people closest to her. Then, I comforted her, telling her not to be sad anymore. The dead would not come back to life, and the only way was to take revenge on Baskerville. It was Hugo who failed to investigate properly and indiscriminately killed the innocent. "Feel free to curse Baskerville, you have more than enough right to do so." But Cindy Wendy looked puzzled and said, "You're part of the Baskerville family, so why are you helping me?" I coldly replied, "I think you know better than I do. This is a very foolish question." After hearing this, Cindy Wendy instantly understood my intention and promised that she would repay today's favor, and that whenever I was short of money, I just need to look for her. In the end, my goal was achieved. One more member joined the anti-Baskerville faction. The next day, Chihuahua arrived early to find me, but as soon as he opened the door, he was stunned by the scene before him. My room was filled with blood and chaos, and even the assassins who had been killed were lying on the floor. I was groggily awakened, and he quickly asked me what had happened. I replied that there had been a lot of flies recently, and killing one or two was hardly a big deal. Soon after, as we walked outside, I told him that it seemed like there had been a lot of inconveniences in my way recently. When I drink water, they poison it. When I check the garden, they pour concentrated sulfuric acid on me. When I walk, a carriage tries to run me over. These accidents have happened no less than 30 times. If I didn't have the blessing of the Styx River, I'd probably have been framed and killed by now. But the protection I had wasn't just my iron body, it was also the Hell Rhino's A-rank skill, Tough Life. Just as Chihuahua and I were discussing how to catch the mastermind behind this, a carriage with the Baskerville flag suddenly appeared. When Chihuahua saw who got off the carriage, fear had already filled his face. He then stood at attention, afraid to even breathe. It turns out it was John, the Baskerville's most outstanding chief butler, who has served for 4 consecutive generations and is extremely strict with his subordinates. If someone makes even the slightest mistake, their life is immediately forfeit. However, John's unexpected appearance still left me puzzled, so I asked him what brought him here. It turns out that due to my recent outstanding performance, my father had sent him to bring me back for a reward. After hearing this, my mind suddenly went blank. Such a situation shouldn't have occurred. As my authority increased, Hugo didn't take action against me, but was instead happy for me. When we arrived at the room where the family was meeting, I saw him holding a headline from the newspaper with various evaluations about me written on it. The reason he was happy for me was that Baskerville had always been known in history as ignorant people who only knew how to swing swords and fight. Now, with all the positive reviews about my governance, that label would no longer be directed at Baskerville. To reward my excellent performance, my father has included me on this year's Colosio Academy list, which is considered the highest institution in the Empire. It is also the place where elites from all over the Empire gather. However, the Academy has a strict rule that anyone who enrolls here must live in the dorms on campus and is not allowed to leave easily. But this is exactly what I was hoping for. If I can enter Colosio Academy smoothly, I will be able to escape my father's watchful eye and speed up my path to becoming stronger. Then my father asked if I had a good relationship with my siblings, and he decided to select a few to accompany me. Without hesitation, I chose the 3 brothers, even though I still feel quite disgusted by them, but training them as living punching bags isn't a bad idea. Then my father asked if I remembered the secret plan I came up with when I was 8. Of course I haven't forgotten. To rent out some ruby mines to the Morgue family, and then use them to wipe out the barbarian tribes and expand Baskerville's territory. At that moment, I saw my father sneering. It turned out that the plan was not only effective but also highly successful. But the only difference was that the head of the Morgue family suggested teaming up with the Baskerville family, and they were unusually modest. So my father decided that I should investigate the rented territory before entering Colosio Academy to observe whether the newly enacted laws were being violated or upheld. Hearing this, I respectfully accepted the task. Afterward, I arrived at the city gate, said goodbye to Chihuahua, and then rode off toward the rented out territory. But I knew that after this inspection, I would be parting ways with Chihuahua. By then, I must hand over all the affairs regarding the governance of the weak city to him. Soon after, I immediately became serious. "You can come out now." In an instant, dozens of cloaked assassins appeared, and they were the Pitbull Knights who assisted me in clearing the slave auctions. The leader, Captain Staffordshire, after confirming the assembly, began the escort mission. But the next second, what he said left me speechless. Uncle Boston Terrier still hasn't given up on incorporating me into their night orders plan. The scene shifted, and we safely arrived at the territory rented out to the Morgue family. At this moment, everything seemed normal to me. There were no violations of the law. I then told Staffordshire, Morgue family wanted to get rid of the barbarians, and for this operation, they have also sent out a considerable fighting force. However, our inspection this time isn't the main purpose. The real intention is to meet with the Morgue family and form a joint alliance. At this moment, the city ahead was where the Morgue army had gathered, and the many skeletal remains around it reminded me me of Camus from my past life. Their mage's habit was to first kill some enemies outside the city, giving a severe warning to the opponent. Suddenly, 3 figures appeared above us. Seeing that we had arrived, they shamelessly said that without their permission, the city gates could not be opened. Upon getting a clear look at the 3 girls, I immediately recognized them. They were the Morgue family's 3 flowers. At this moment, I decisively declared my identity, but to my surprise, not only was I not given any respect, they even told me to wait outside for a while. They claimed they would report my request to open the city gates to their superiors, but couldn't guarantee how long it would take. Hearing this, my emotions started to fluctuate, and then I looked up, glaring at the 3 of them saying, "If you don't open the gates for me, then the lease will end early starting today." The 3 were so frightened by my words that they broke into a cold sweat, but they still gritted their teeth and endured. Then, one of them began to gather magical power in her hand. Their fear was nothing compared to their hatred for Baskerville. Seeing that they really intended to fight, I decided not to hold back any longer. However, Staffordshire, who was nearby, was about to draw his sword to teach them a lesson, but I immediately stopped him. This matter started because of me, so I will. Just as I was about to finish, suddenly, 3 voices shouted in unison from behind me. I then turned my head and focused my gaze, and as expected, they were none other than my human punching bags, the Baskervilles' trident. The 3 of them looked at me and said, "Leave this to us." The sisters' anger surged upon hearing this. This time, they must properly teach these idiots a lesson. But what they didn't know was that at this moment, I was feeling extremely awkward from their over-the-top language. The reason they came to assist me was because I had recommended them to my father to attend the Colosseo Academy. Fortunately, they didn't know my true intentions. According to my past life's memories, although the trident wasn't the brightest, they would do whatever it took to fulfill their orders. Looks like I can now legitimately call them my punching bags. Suddenly, the 3 sisters yelled in unison, "3 stinky idiots who knows nothing but to stick together." But the 3 brothers were completely unfazed, and they immediately gave the sisters an obscene hand gesture. This really pushed the sisters to their limit, and they instantly gathered magic in their hands. And seeing them like this, I couldn't help but think of my past life. Losis used water magic, Middlesis wielded earth magic, while Hysis specialized in plant magic. Although these weren't high-level spells within the Morgue family, if the 3 sisters could coordinate, their combined power would greatly increase. At this moment, a small seedling suddenly sprouted from the ground, and the next second, it rapidly grew into a giant vine roots. Hyburo showed no fear, his gaze filled with killing intent, and with the Baskerville First technique, he easily severed a massive vine root. His smooth and fluid movements even made Staffordshire praise him. As for me, I wore a serious expression, because the 3 sisters hadn't even unleashed their full power yet. The next second, Hyburo was ambushed by a vine root from the side, and although he reacted quickly and barely managed to block it, the immense force still forced him to retreat momentarily. At that moment, seeing the trident's miserable state, the 3 sisters immediately began mocking them, calling them nothing more than useless sword wielders. Hearing this, the 3 brothers were so angry they nearly exploded, because this was not only a humiliation to them, but also a disgrace to the entire Baskerville family. In an instant, the 3 of them flashed into the air, split up, and launched their attack. But the 3 sisters were no pushovers, and despite the trident's fierce assault, they were able to respond to each attack with ease. Seeing that the 2 sets of triplets couldn't decide a winner, I realized waiting any longer would only waste my time. With everything lately being rather busy, I decided to personally teach these disrespectful tenants a lesson. But just then, a massive fireball suddenly appeared, and with a loud explosion, excitement instantly spread across my face. With this move, the annoying ones would probably be burned to ashes. But what I didn't expect was that the trident only had their hair singed, with no significant damage. They were also puzzled, wondering how the 3 sisters had mastered fire magic. However, when the smoke cleared, it became clear that the fireball hadn't been cast by them at all, but by someone standing on the roof. It was Camus, the future strongest mage of the Morgue family. She disdainfully addressed the people below, saying, "Daring to cause trouble in my jurisdiction, whether from the Morgue family or outsiders, none shall be forgiven." After that, he leapt down from the roof. The 3 sisters wanted to take the opportunity to explain they hadn't meant to offend, but were met with Camus' curse-filled glare. She then pointed to the enemy suspended in midair by tree branches, and angrily scolded them, "If you don't want to end up like that, then shut the hell up." But just as she finished speaking, Camus noticed me, and quickly, her fierce expression disappeared, and she greeted me, "Long time no see. It seems like it's been 7 years since we last met." Just like in my past life, Camus, now grown, was stunningly beautiful. The Pitbull Knights behind me, after just one glance, were all filled with thoughts of marrying her in this lifetime. At this moment, I then recounted everything that had happened, to which Camus immediately roared at me, "Damn it, you haven't seen me for so long and this is all you have to say?" Staffordshire instantly sensed trouble. It seemed that after the recent fight, it was now time for a clash between the geniuses of the 2 families. Even though Camus was furious, I still didn't understand what he meant. Out of frustration, she pointed at me and said, "I am your future wife. How can you treat me like this?" Hearing this, both sets of triplets were dumbfounded. Even I was left speechless. It turns out I had a fiancé. day, and I almost forgot about that. Soon after, Camus guided me through the area and took the opportunity to mock me for underestimating the strength of the barbarians, thinking that young hounds alone could support the front line. I told her that Baskerville has been battling barbarians for years. Strong hounds have long been deployed to the front lines, lurking in the shadows. It's just that my father entrusted me with another task, to inspect whether the land rented to the Morgue family is lawful and follows the newly established laws. To test whether I was just boasting, Camus threw another question at me, about which tribe among the barbarians is the most troublesome. At this moment I was utterly speechless, but I still earnestly answered her question. There are two troublesome tribes, the Balak, famous for their warriors, and the Rococo, who primarily use witchcraft as their main attack method. However, the most troublesome part is Balak's archery, which is on an entirely different level compared to the Empire's. No one knows the principle behind it. Camus was very satisfied with my answer, so she gave me a score of 8, centered around herself. I was quite confused by this. Camus explained that men don't need to be too smart. In her view, men should just be like little stupid. She then rated me on other aspects: horseback riding, 6 points, clothing, 4 points, etiquette, 1 point. As for my appearance, it remained the same as before, 99 points. I hurriedly stopped her from doing such things, but Camus wouldn't listen because she had to be strict with her future husband. I told her that the arranged marriage was just a childhood joke with Adolphe. There's no need to take it seriously. At that time, I just wanted to test my own strength, and the broken sword piercing Adolphe's water pot could only be considered luck, not a real victory. At this moment, Camus' anger immediately surged, muttering to herself about how her uncle had used such a low-level test to choose her partner. But since he had already made a decision, she still had to be patient and forgiving with her future husband. But my next words pushed Camus' anger to its peak. Forget about what happened that day. I'll make it as if it never happened. Upon hearing this, she suddenly threw a piece of clothing at my face and told me that the arranged marriage was the premise of the cooperation between the two great families, and now that it has been implemented, there's no turning back. She also said she was a genius and would remember every important matter clearly. But speaking of which, the clothing I once lent Camus for modesty was still kept to this day. It seems this arranged marriage can no longer be denied. Camus then told me about recent events. Barbarians would occasionally invade this territory, not only plundering crops but also slaves, and the bullet holes on the city walls were caused by Balaks during their invasions. After long-term observation, our scouts discovered that the Balaks' arrows were infused strong aura, allowing them to easily penetrate walls 2 to 3 meters thick. At that time, Adolphe's proud magical shield was also shattered. Fortunately, he survived, though his pride took a serious blow. This reminded me of the scar on my father's face. He had warned me that the barbarians are now more than 10 times stronger than before, and even many talented descendants have been born. Just then, a subordinate from the Morgue family came to report that, just 2.5 minutes ago, the frontline search team caught a suspected barbarian scout. Upon seeing him, I immediately determined that he belonged to the Rococo tribe, but they are also extremely cruel, having cast a blood curse on themselves, making it impossible for Morgue's memory-reading magic to work. Then Camus scolded him. "You despicable lowlifes, how many villagers did you take away during the ambush on the village a few days ago?" Camus was so angry because among those people was her most beloved cousin, but since everyone who could speak the barbarian language had been captured, Camus had no idea what he was saying. Seeing this, I told her that I had studied some basic barbarian language in my childhood, so let me do the interrogation. But when I relayed Camus' questions to him, the barbarian showed creepy smile, and then coldly said they were killed. Though the outcome was grim, I still related exactly to Camus. The moment he heard the word dead, Camus couldn't contain her rage. Time gleamed brightly, and what greeted the barbarian were heart-piercing spikes and on-the-spot executions by fire. Camus' eyes were filled with the aura of death, and she swore that she would exterminate the barbarians to the very last one. After doing all this, Camus turned and walked outside, but when I followed closely behind, I realized that Camus was actually outside crying. She didn't want everyone to see her in this state. I hurried to comfort her not to be too upset, but Camus told me the cousin who was killed had been with her since childhood, and she had never been exposed to killing. She shouldn't have ended her life in such a cruel way. At this moment, Camus suddenly asked me because she heard familiar barbarian language. I decided not to hide it anymore. What the barbarian had said wasn't just about death. He deliberately mentioned that all the people they had captured had been eaten. After hearing this, Camus cried again. This time she cried without holding back. She felt like the most useless person in the world for being unable to save her cousin. Soon after, Camus quickly adjusted her mindset and swore to immediately come up with a plan to actively attack the barbarians. I extended my hand to help her up, but just as she was about to take it, a bell rang. Upon hearing this, Camus' expression immediately became serious because she knew what this bell sound represented. It signified the barbarian tribe's appearance near the fortress. Meanwhile, on the other side of the mountain, an archer was drawing her bow, preparing to shoot, aiming at the city wall several kilometers away. And when she shot, the arrow poured out like cannonball, directly targeting the scout soldiers on the wall. By the time they sensed the danger, it was already already too late. The arrow not only killed the 2 scout soldiers instantly, but even the wall was turned into ruins by a single shot. Then, the woman in charge gave the order to invade, and her subordinates rode giant wolves, wildly slaughtering innocent civilians. As for the women, they used ropes to capture their desired men, preparing to take them back as breeding machines. Such a large disturbance quickly brought me to the scene. Just then, 2 magical ropes suddenly attacked me, wrapping securely around my neck. I raised my head and looked up, only to see 2 barbarian women in front of me. From their conversation, it seemed like they were completing the tribe's task of finding husbands, and they appeared to be plotting other unknown secrets. But how could I let them succeed so easily? In the next second, I pulled the ropes, flinging both women into the air and smashing them hard onto the ground. The 2 barbarian men watching were stunned, but they quickly recovered, assuming a defensive stance and shooting arrows. At this moment, I had no intention of killing them. I simply blocked their attacks with my sword. Before coming here, Hugo had anxiously reminded me that until the main force of Baskerville arrives, I absolutely cannot initiate a battle. However, just as I was thinking, a ball of blazing fire suddenly descended in front of me, instantly turning 2 barbarian tribe members into ashes. It was obvious who had arrived, but right now, Camus was extremely angry because she saw that I didn't want to kill the barbarians. Then, Camus mocked me, saying I wasn't fit to be Baskerville's strongest graduate, but my explanation was that my father had given me an order, and until the main force arrived, I couldn't act on my own. My words hit Camus like a dose of adrenaline and said, "Up to now, you still want to listen to the useless orders from Baskerville? Then go away. I alone can destroy the barbarians." She immediately went all out, casting a forbidden magic spell, determined to wipe out the entire barbarian tribe, even if it meant burning everything to the ground. At this moment, the rage had already clouded Camus' mind, and she began attacking the enemy recklessly, without considering the consequences. But to my surprise, her anger actually enhanced the lethality of her attacks. Just as I thought this land would be burned to ashes, enemies hiding in the blind spot launched a sneak attack, and a needle struck Camus' neck with precision. Luckily, it wasn't a poison needle, but one that would induce a numbing effect. Just as I was about to step in and help, another barbarian threw a rope at me from behind. Fortunately, I reacted quickly and saw through the enemy's trick. I then told Camus, "How about we retreat?" Camus, unwilling to listen, scolded back, "If we leave, what will happen to the farmlands and slaves here? Are we just going to hand them over? I have to wait for Baskerville's main army before I can fight. No matter what, I won't back down today. I must avenge my cousin." But just as I was about to forcibly take Camus away, a massive power surge suddenly erupted behind me. Fortunately, I reacted in time and was able to dodge successfully. When I finally saw the face of my attacker, I realized it was the barbarian tribe's genius girl mentioned earlier by Camus. Meanwhile, another barbarian took advantage of my distraction to kidnap Camus. At this moment, I don't know what to do, as things have been developing in a bad direction, though this is also a destiny Camus must endure. In her previous life, she was also imprisoned by the barbarian tribe, but he would soon annihilate them and return, truly transforming into the Empire's magic queen. Suddenly, the genius girl leapt up and attacked from the side. Naturally, such a move couldn't hurt me in the slightest. However, the fact that she could inflict such damage with just about tensed my nerves. She didn't give me a moment to recover, charging at me again with her kick. The attack struck my abdomen, and the powerful impact forced me to retreat several meters. It seems I've met a formidable opponent. Just as I was about to fight with all my might, the sudden gesture of the barbarian tribe's genius girl left me stunned. She pointed at herself and spoke in human language. "We meet again." At that moment, a memory flashed through my mind, and I realized that Ian, whom I had saved from being sold as a slave, was now the newly emerged genius girl of the barbarian tribe. I then asked her, "So, this is how you repay my kindness?" Ian believed that this matter had nothing to do with me, and that it was the Morgue family that almost led her to be buried and become a slave. This time, she came with the determination to seek revenge and wreak havoc. After saying this, Ian jumped onto her white wolf mount and told me that her mission of revenge was completed, and if I wanted to save Camus, I should follow Ian and her group. Meanwhile, having heard the news, Adolphe led his soldiers to the scene, but it was already too late. Camus had been captured by the barbarians. Seeing the remaining barbarians trying to leave, Adolphe immediately recited a spell. Just by touching the ground, a powerful gust of air immediately blasted the ground to smithereens. However, even so, the barbarians' mounts were still able to dodge effortlessly, easily avoiding Adolphe's assault and escaping over the collapsed city walls. Following the escape route of the enemies, Morgue soldiers reported to Adolphe that the barbarians' route was actually towards the existing forbidden zone of the Red Black Mountain. Hearing this, Adolphe was utterly astounded. There are various unknown dangers there. Rushing in might not lead to total annihilation, but the injuries would be severe. At the same time, he began to doubt his own strength. Could it be that my dear niece is captured, and I, Adolphe, am truly powerless? Seeing this, I suddenly spoke up. "If we chase now, we can still make it." And I also told Adolphe that I could lead the way, as I used to go to the forbidden area as a child to farm monsters. But this is also thanks to me being a reborn individual. As soon as I finished speaking, Adolphe urgently asked me to take action. At this moment, the soldier behind behind again advised, with our current forces, entering the forbidden area is simply a death sentence. But before he could finish, Adolf stopped him and then scolded, damn it, she is my most beloved niece. If anyone does not wish to go, they may do so at will. Whether or not the mission is successful, I will not blame anyone. Now I have no other choice but to place my last hope on Camus' fiancée. The scene shifts, and we arrive at the boundary of the forbidden area in the Red-Black Mountain. Although this is also part of the Baskerville territory, as soon as night falls, a large number of bloodthirsty monsters suddenly appear. At this moment, Adolf was stunned. He finally understood the gap between his family and the Baskervilles. Just in terms of courage alone, they had already lost completely, because everyone who accompanied him was from the Baskervilles. As for me, I took on the role of the vanguard for the entire team. Whenever monsters blocked our way forward, I would draw my sword and instantly kill them all. Before long, we finally caught up with the barbarians, and we located their temporary camp set up during a rest break, and I, relying on my past life's experience, reminded everyone that the barbarians, whenever they rest, would scatter dried leaves 8 meters away from their camp to hear the sounds of their pursuers. So next we must. But before I could finish, Adolf then cast a spell towards my lower limbs. Although it was only a minor spell for him, it was perfectly suited for this situation, as it effectively eliminated noise while walking and indicated that he would handle what comes next, so I don't need to interfere. Meanwhile, in the camp ahead, Camus was loudly cursing the barbarians, warning them not to let her break free, or she would burn their entire tribe to ashes. However, no matter how much she shouted, the guards completely ignored her, simply because not everyone could understand human language like Ian did. Seeing that her threats were ineffective, Camus fell into a slump. Suddenly, the barbarian Hun who had captured her appeared from the side, beginning to examine Camus' upper and lower body, planning to use her as a breeding tool in the future. Seeing this, Camus directly scolded him to not entertain any ideas about her. However, Ahun also could not understand her words. The only thing he could discern was her defiant gaze. Then, Ahun directly grabbed Camus' cheek and then pulled out an arrow, ready to brand the future slave with the punishment for resistance. Just then, Ian walked over and said, "Get away from my slave." Naturally, Ahun was displeased at having his prize taken away. "Although you are my commander, Ian, it was obviously me who personally captured this Morg girl." Ian immediately questioned him. "What do you mean you captured her? Do you not recognize your own strength? Without me holding off that swordsman, do you really think you could have escaped easily?" But Ahun still insisted on not giving up the slave he was about to obtain. Ian didn't waste further words. Her fists began to emit a blue aura. "If you don't agree with what I said, then let's have a duel. Whoever wins gets the slave." Under such power, Ahun was instantly frightened into a cold sweat, hastily waving his hands to explain that he shouldn't have talked back, and that he no longer wanted the slave, leaving his commander to deal with it as she saw fit. It seemed Ian had won this standoff, and just as Camus was about to say something, Ian kicked her in the chest and said, "Damn it, I was captured by your Morg family to be a slave. If it wasn't for the slight chance of kindness I received, I simply couldn't escape the fate of being a slave. But you won't have the luck I had. I'll take my time to tame you so much that you'll feel it in your bones and soul. Licking the space between my toes will be a daily routine for you." Just then, a violent explosion occurred behind Ian. By the time she reacted, her subordinates had already suffered severe casualties, and the one capable of killing so many in an instant was Adolf, Camus' uncle. "You despicable and vile barbarians, return my niece to me this instant." The next second, they began to completely eliminate the barbarians. Seeing two enemies mounting giant wolves trying to escape, Adolf loudly shouted, "Today, we must not let any barbarian escape from here." Meanwhile, I stealthily approached the tree where Camus was tied up, and then made a no-talking gesture. But when I cut the rope binding Camus, she excitedly asked if I was here to rescue her. Eventually, my covert operation was discovered. However, Ian had already known I would come, so she acknowledged my effort to traverse tirelessly and risk everything to rescue my beloved, casually giving me a passing grade. Hearing this, I was utterly confused, not understanding the implication of her words. However, Camus seemed to grasp her intent. Their eyes met in an instant. Meanwhile, I was contemplating how to hide my strength and fight Ian. Although she could injure my own father, Hugo, and Adolf, according to memories from a past life, I had never seen Ian born among the barbarians. I had speculated she was the genius archer Night Fox I met in my past life. But Ian is young, and her skills are immature. Could she be a descendant of the Night Fox? Meanwhile, a tube hidden in the blind spot was aiming at Camus. Just as the poison needle was about to hit Camus, I reacted swiftly, blocking the sneak attack with my hand. But actually, I had already noticed the attacker's position. Seeing things getting more complicated, I told Camus that I would immediately take her to Adolf. Then, I turned and retreated swiftly toward the distance. Ian then touched her head, feeling utterly frustrated. She had thought I would obediently go back with her, but it seems that if soft methods won't work, she would have to resort to hard ones. Just then, two barbarian archers blocking the way launched an attack on us, but such an attack couldn't harm me in the slightest. I merely drew my sword and easily blocked their full force strike. Unbeknownst to me, while I relaxed, Ian, standing still, suddenly drew her bow. To be able to take me back, she had to take Camus away. The next second, a fearsome and and powerful arrow suddenly shot forth. By the time I realized something was wrong, the arrow was already right in front of us. Fortunately, Adolf arrived in time and used a wide-range ice magic spell to narrowly save Camus from death. Upon learning that his niece was severely poisoned, Adolf immediately used a healing spell on Camus. But since it was a tricky paralyzing poison and Adolf was not of priestly origin, he cannot remove everything. So, he decided to immediately take Camus to the Divan Quo Vadis. But the very next second, Camus actually pushed away her uncle's hand that was treating her, then jumped up and tightly hugged me, thanking me for saving her life again. Seeing this, Adolf was instantly stunned, tearfully saying that he also did his best at rescuing her. Hearing this, Camus immediately scolded him. "Why did you only come now? I'm definitely telling my mom when we get back." Just then, a lasso suddenly appeared, firmly locking around my neck. It turns out it was Ian's doing. Then she told me that there wasn't much time left, and that following her now could save my life. Hearing this, I was completely baffled. Just then, a chilling loud noise suddenly occurred. The gray sky was instantly dyed purple. At this moment, Ian was sweating profusely from fear. Although she knew time was running short, she had not expected it to come so quickly. Meanwhile, the Beelzebub in my right hand started to make crunching noises, continuously sending me danger warnings. At the same time, a huge spike burst forth from the ground. The barbarians, knowing what was coming, said that the monster had arrived. Just as Camus was pondering where it came from, this spike suddenly split into 8, firmly implanting itself in the ground. Adolf realized the extreme danger of this object, immediately stood in front of Camus to protect her. Similarly, the moment I saw this, I also prepared for defense. I couldn't believe that I would encounter this monster here. If I remember correctly, the attacking monster is the S risk rating, Madam 8 Legs. Just then, the giant monster let out a chilling roar, its voice echoing throughout the mountains.